Hello and welcome to a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time, the podcast that dives behind the scenes of some of the best TV shows ever made. It's been a minute, but we're back for season 2. I'm your host, Marine Perot. I'm a freelance journalist and TV critic, and on each episode of this podcast, I chat with someone who worked or works on the shows we discuss. Writers, directors, crew members, actors, you name it, they stop by to talk about what makes great TV and to tell us what goes on beyond our screens. I'm very excited for this first episode of Once Upon a TV Time's new season because it has everything to do with one of my favorite shows of all time, a show that premiered on Netflix in 2018 and scared us all as much as it moved us. It was loosely based on a 1959 novel by Shirley Jackson and created by the new master of horror, Mike Flanagan. Ladies and gents, and everyone in between, let's talk about The Haunting of Hill House. This series follows the story of the Crane family over 2 timelines. One takes place over the course of a pivotal summer they spent living in a house in rural Massachusetts. The other is set 25 years later as they still live with the trauma that followed that fateful summer. Hill House isn't just a complex ghost story with great emotional depth and supported by a flawless cast. It's also a character-driven story, and one of those characters is the house itself, which haunts its inhabitants as much as it haunts the audience. So who's here with me today to talk about The Haunting of Hill House? Well, none other than the man who built that haunted mansion, production designer Patricio Farrell. Welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Patricio was not only the production designer on The Haunting of Hill House, but also on another show in the Flaniverse, The Haunting of Bly Manor. His other credits include various TV productions and feature films such as Dr. Sleep, The Patient on FX and Disney+, Reacher on Prime Video, and Dark Matter on Apple TV. Before we even get to your work on that show, I want to talk about what a production designer even is, because I'm French, and in French, production designer translates into chief set decorator. And I feel like that's not all. I feel like that's reducing what the role entails because it's not about just decorating a set. So can you explain to me and the listeners what a production designer really does?
Yeah, I think that you said it very well in terms of the concept feels a bit reduced by that description. It is still true. But anyway, production designer, the job of the production designer is basically to dream up a space or spaces and eventually create the physical world where the action takes place. So from our, bunch of words that become a script, becomes our Bible, and we read, and from that we make breakdowns, we do all kinds of research. Particular, I think everybody does research. I love, that's a huge part of what I like to do and do a lot of it. But so basically from there, the plan is to conjure up that world, and it's where the action takes place, and it's ideally a place that brings inspiration and helps tell the story.
And so how did you become a production designer?
I've been passionate about films and television all of my life. And until a certain point in my kind of late teens, I did not even consider that could be a path. And then eventually it became something that I thought I could do. And I started in Argentina. I always had a camera with me, first a still camera, then a Super 8 camera. But still, I went to law school for a very short time. And eventually, when I realized that life had no meaning, I thought, well, if there's no meaning, might as well do something I want to do. And I started on the path trying to get to schools, which was very hard at that time. It wasn't as common, perhaps, as it is today to think about studying, and there were not that many schools. I grew up in Buenos Aires, that's where I'm from, and there were basically 2 schools, and 1,000 people would try to get into a school and only 10 or 20 would get in. So anyway, I started doing that, and then I got an offer to work on a film, and that's kind of how I started the path. And then it just, I don't know, life kind of took me into the art department, first on the movie Evita, Alan Parker's film. I was already living in the US, in San Francisco, but I got a call from people that I used to work in films in Argentina. And the idea was that I was going to be in the camera department, but since I was there early visiting family, the prop master, a Scottish, David Balfour, a Scottish man, very, very good, tough guy, but very, very good person and good at what he does. He saw me there one day visiting and wanted me to be his assistant and work with him. And I basically couldn't get away from doing that. And it opened a whole world that I had no idea and no interest until that moment, until that time. And then I started really loving it for reasons of what I was just saying about research and all the world of just having to recreate from currency to saddles to all kinds of elements and then give the proper distress or, age, different things. And so I loved that. And then that prop master recommended me to Jimmy Chow from Vancouver, Canada, who was going to Patagonia to shoot a film called 7 Years in Tibet. So then I did that. I worked on that film in props. And while I was there, I met people that introduced me somehow. I landed in San Francisco, where I had been living for like close to 10 years, more or less, on my first feature in the US, which was What Dreams May Come. And the production designer was an Argentine production designer, Eugenio Zanetti, wonderful man and an incredible production designer. So that kind of blew my mind. All the different time periods, but places where we had to be and how we recreated all of that, or how, I saw people doing that and participating in that. Just that kind of sat me. And then I worked a lot I kind of started working my way up just by being there, by wanting to work, from art department assistant to researcher to assistant art director, and eventually became a production designer. That was my kind of story of how it happened in a very small nutshell.
Would you say that that's kind of the path, if someone is interested in that field and in becoming eventually a production designer? Is that it? Is that start with the prop department or start somewhere within the art department and see where it takes you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that anybody that wants to be a production designer should start in the props department, but that's definitely a way to start. For me, it was more of an accidental. I stumbled into the art department, and that's how it happened. But if you really just already... So I knew that I wanted to work in films. But of course, when I was a kid, I think my first feature, I turned 18 or something like that. I'm 58 now. So it's been a while. But at that time, when you're a kid, or I wanted to be Fellini or Orson Welles, I didn't. And then you do all kinds of things, and lucky if you get to make a living working in films. So I consider myself very lucky that I'm part of this small group of people that actually get to create and decide the look, the mood of the stories we tell.
So what are some of the skills needed to be a production designer? I'm guessing from what you said about research, there is an attention to detail.
Yes, certainly. I mean, there has to be an aesthetic inclination for design and everything that has to do with aesthetics and how things work. But there's so many skills and so many variations of the skills that I bring are not necessarily the skills that another person brings, particularly people that always knew that wanted to work not just in films, let's say, but in design. They're probably a lot better at certain things that I love to draw, but I'm not as skillful as some people that have been doing that. I always drew all my life, but it's still something that I can compare my skills to some people that are just a lot better. But I think that's true for whatever anybody does. There's always someone that... So I think at some point you have to just go for it. And if that's something that you are passionate about, art history, design, I think history is very important. Certainly for me, I love history. I bring a lot of history to my designs, even if it is something that is science fiction or maybe future. I always find a way, or history finds me, but there's always something that I can rescue from somewhere else and give it a twist. But just, I think that sometimes that brings a lot of kind of like a good foundation to design when it's based on stuff that then you can make your twist or make it your own or the own story again. It's all about the story that we are telling. So that's something that I always feel very compelled to make sure that the design helps the story, but it's not just design for design. It's not trying to be woohoo, look at this. It's actually rather ungrateful many times, our profession, our job, because I think that when you do your job well, most people don't even notice it. Most people don't even realize that we built it or that we create it. It feels that it's been always there. That's when you're successful, when something feels organic. Something feels that it's part of the story you don't even realize, but it's there. It's involving you, it's helping to move the story along. Is again, best case scenario, is helping the cast that is within those walls, within this environment, feel more the character that they are channeling.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, your previous credits, there's one in particular that's pretty interesting because in 1999, you were within the art department on the movie The Haunting, which is also based on the Shirley Jackson novel that inspired the Mike Flanagan's show. So did it feel like coming full circle when you ended up being the production designer on The Haunting of Hill House?
There's a couple of things there. On one hand, the production designer of The Haunting of that feature film was Eugenio Zanetti. Okay. So by then, I was part of his team, which is something I'm still today very proud. That man can, speaking of conjuring up worlds, I mean, has a vast imagination. So it was, in a way, coming full circle. It also was a huge challenge to be able to channel on all the stuff that I feel I had been absorbing and hopefully learning from him and from different teams I work with, but also the responsibility of learning but not just imitating or not just not falling to just doing what was already done. There are certain things, particularly when we're basing this story on the same book, there's some things that you cannot escape. But the idea is always to bring something original. It's something, out of respect for the people that taught you, out of respect for the people that hire you, and out of self-respect, right? We want to bring something as original as possible and bring in elements that maybe were used before, but then we use them in our own way. That said, every project has its own set of challenges that we have to deal with. Challenges and opportunities. So those are also kind of guiding you in a way.
So how did you come on board The Haunting of Hill House?
Well, by that time, I had already collaborated with Mike Flanagan, the creator of the show, and his producer, Trevor Macy. So yeah, they called me. I was, of course, super excited. I'm still excited about the fact that I worked on that show.
Yeah. What attracted you within that story?
Well, part of what we were just talking about, I mean, I was very aware in that sense. This was probably one of the main advantages that I had from the get-go, that I was aware of the scale and the challenges of such a project. So yeah, it was very exciting and just to be able to do my own interpretation of such a classic. I never read the novel, but I read excerpts of it, pieces, but never sat down and read the whole novel. I believe in everything, so it's very scary for me to read these scripts. I cannot read them at night, and I always try to at some point read them, of course, and I read them multiple times, but then I just focus, okay, Let's think about the frame of the window. Let's think about the moldings. Let's think about the flooring. I gotta stop thinking about the ghosts and all of that because if not, I can't do it.
It is a very, I read the book and it's very unsettling, and the house in it is particularly scary. To when I read it, I was kind of amazed at how it wasn't the ghost story that was scary, it was the house itself.
Yes. Speaking of reasons to be excited about it, working a project like that, this is one of the few, even though sets are always characters, there's few projects where everybody knows it. And the house, in this case, it's pretty much the main character. It's on the title. It's
Yeah.
The Haunting of Hill House. So that's a very, already from the beginning, a big nod to production design and all of the team, of course, that works. Production design, as everything else in the film industry, it's a very collaborative effort. And I'd like to believe that as production designers, we are the ones conjuring up the dreams. But of course, it's always a large team because even in a small project that you have a lot less people, it's still a bunch of people in relation to how big that project or how small that project may be. And you mentioned set decoration, of course, set decorator, the prop master, those are teams, construction. There's a lot of teams that come down in this kind of pyramid where the production designer as the head of that department. There's a lot of other whole departments under that kind of umbrella. So all these people are huge collaborators in the final creation world's product that we come up with.
Where did you go?
It was here. It was right here.
Oh, honey, you're freezing.
I was right here and I was screaming and shouting and none of you could see me. Why couldn't you see me?
It's okay, baby.
I waved and jumped and screamed and you didn't even look. None of you even looked.
So sorry. We're so sorry.
And so since you brought that up, let's talk about Hill House, the house itself. Like you said, it's the main character of the show. The show revolves around this family who experiences paranormal activities within this house, and that's going to traumatize them for the rest of their life. And the house itself is kind of like the theater of that trauma, but also the personification of that trauma. So I myself am fascinated with haunted house, and especially on film and television. The real ones I don't really mess with, but in film and TV, I love them because I find that they're always gorgeous and overwhelming and also not necessarily creepy. Sometimes they look a little, rugged or abandoned, but most of the time they're just beautiful and you're attracted to them. You want to go and you want to go inside and you want to see what it looks like. So, of course, I loved Hill House. It's absolutely gorgeous inside and out. And before we talk about the inside, I wanted to see what was your artistic vision for the house before you started working on the show, considering that the show has this blend of emotional drama and horror. So what were you going for when you were picturing the house?
Well, you mentioned how these houses are usually beautiful and not necessarily scary. That's something that Mike Flanagan and I established from the get-go the first time we worked together. When I was we had a conversation. I was finishing a job in Mexico, and Trevor, Mike, we were on a video call, seeing if we were, well suited to work together. And one of the things I said, or one of the main things when it was, out of the questions, was that I didn't want to make scary sets. I said, I'll make beautiful sets. You bring the scary parts with your writing. Mm-hmm. And I also express how I feel many times when it's so scary and it kind of loses. It could be good for that moment, but it's not something that you take away with you as audience, as much as when you're in a more normal space, that you don't expect something to happen and then happen something terrorific or whatever. I think it has a different kind of more lasting value to it. So anyway, that was already kind of established that I don't want to make scary sets. Sometimes here we have an attic, we have places, a basement. Those are just intrinsically just I think we all feel we are going down. You're going to you're to unconscious, right? The symbolisms are already there. Darker places, humid, like abandoned, people don't go often, spider webs, all the kind of things that are probably normal in many ways. So for Hill House, that was from the get-go the idea. And something that I came up with early on was the sense of that the house had to have this sense of kind of schizophrenia amplified, because this is based on the robber barons of the end of the century, and these people, robber barons in the United States, were all these very, very wealthy people that would try to emulate the styles of Europe by bringing sometimes a castle stone by stone. But then sometimes they would also love the castle from here and the other manor from over there, artwork from all these different places. So there was a way not just to show wealth, but how they travel. And so their houses many times did offer this mix of styles. So that was something that historically was accurate for the kind of house that we were talking about. But so I thought that we had to kind of amp up that kind of schizophrenia, that mix of styles and elements. So that was something that at the beginning we contemplated the possibility of building the exterior, but it was just not the best way to use the resources we had. And so we were looking for a house and we couldn't find. Then we found a house that was really great, that was for sale. And everybody was enamored with this place. And we thought that we could use the exterior, the interior, and then even kind of harvest some of the pieces from the house interior and take to a stage, because even if we use the interior, we were always going to have to build some. And so Mike and Trevor were into it, but the studio, even though it would have been a good deal, I mean, for layman's size or for us, the studio, they don't really like to buy, they don't want to deal with that kind of stuff. They don't want to end up having a house. So they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So we kept on looking, and it became one of the, obviously the bigger issues, because that was a main set that we could not find. So at some point I had to start not just designing, but building some of the interior sets, because we had a deadline. And so I had to start building stuff and designing windows and things, and without having a location. So by the time we did find this location, which ended up being a fantastic place, we did transform some of the exterior of the house to match the interior that we were already working on. In part, not just because we were already working on it, but because it looked better for our story. Like, the house, the original location, is a wonderful house, and but it has a door that is rather underwhelming. It's kind of like a one door, So here I had designed these double doors, big, to this big space, the big foyer. So we didn't like that. So we brought our own front, our own double doors, and we just planted on the existing house our own set of doors, and we changed the whole entrance and the whole kind of carport there. And then we did a lot of greens work also. There were all these trees that were, I'm very careful always with just the natural aspects of a location or wherever we go. I always try to be as much as I can a force of good for trees. And many times I got away with having municipalities streets of trees that were forgotten and abandoned and neglected. And we need, this street needs to look better. And so production talks and the city goes and trim trees, and which are, makes them healthier and better. But sometimes also we find ourselves in places where trees that are just, they were planted at the wrong place. Like in this case, there were all these, there were a handful of crepe myrtles that were planted right against the house, which is bad for the trees and for the house. And they just didn't make any sense also for where we were supposed to be, and the time changes. So with, of course, permission from the owner of the house, we took those down and then replanted other plants in other places to make up for that. So we brought our own set of interventions to the exterior of the house. But the main and then there were also at the end just also we designed some parts of the house that are not really there, but made it look bigger. So that was added in post-production. Stuff that we designed in the art department, but then post-production added some pieces to make it be even a bit more monumental and just. Yeah.
I went lurking online and found that house. So it's Bitcham Manor, and it's in Georgia, near Atlanta, where you shot. And I found a Zillow post where you can see like the interiors and all that. So I was kind of comparing like what it really looks like to what it looks like on the show. And I was wondering if part of the reason you picked that house for its exterior was because of what you mentioned about the schizophrenic aspect of the house, because it is kind of a strange style house because it has that turret that gives it like a medieval vibe, and it also has this Tudor style.
Yeah, it actually, one of those things that often happens, well, and certainly often happens to me because I'm the kind of person always working with a location manager and the locations team that I'd rather keep on looking and then minimize the work, find something that is perfect. I work with many people that will like, oh, this is great, but we'll change this, we change everything. Like, what's so great about it if we are changing everything? This house, we had to adapt certain elements, but overall the house itself was great, but also the fact that sits on a very large lot. It's more of almost rural environment where the house is, so that in comparison to other houses that were in the city of Atlanta that maybe also had, particularly for a city, large lots, but you still have a lot of neighbors. And we knew that that was going to be an issue sooner or later. So this place really, I don't know how big it's, a couple of acres, a few acres. So we were self-contained in there. So it ended up being great. And that house after that was used on some very good shows that also they added in post-production different parts. And the interior, as far as I know, I can't remember the one particular show that they used it and it looked great, but the interior was also a different house.
So as you mentioned, you built the interior of Hill House in the soundstage. It's a whole set it's a 2-story set, right? That was fully functional because of the way the show was shot, especially for episode 6, 2 Storms, which involved several one-shots and you had to be able to move around the house. Can you tell me, how did you approach that challenge of constructing such a huge set?
Well, it's actually, we had a big challenge with space, stage space in particular. We didn't have enough stage space. And it was something that the first time I went on a scout through the stages, I made it clear that for me, we didn't have enough stage space. Anyway, the answer was, well, that's what we got. So at some point when we were developing more and more of the sets and the scale that was needed for all of this, we were at the point that we had to start building. That's why we started building even before having the exterior location. Because if we were going to shoot at a certain date, you have to have a certain amount of weeks, months. So at that point, since my calling for more stage space there was no solution to that, I brought up the alternative of saying we either get more space to do it the way it's usually done in houses or mansions or whatever you do. Generally speaking, it's much more common to do one, like the first floor here and the second story over there. It could be on the same stage next to each other, on a different stage, on a different studio, but you have it separately. So when I went to with this proposal to Mike and the producing team, saying this is the only alternative I can find. We either get more space or we have to build this house in 2 stories, which gives pros and cons because there's a whole lot of engineering challenges. Many walls are not going to be wild. The ceiling is what it is, so you can get the camera where maybe you want it or maybe you could have had if we don't have that. On the other hand, I also laid down all the ideas that I thought was great if we could do it that way, because all the fluidity that would bring to the shoot, that they could go and they can just follow people all around. So at that point, Mike and Michael Fimognari, the DP, they fell in love with that idea. And then later on, they came up, the whole episode 6 came up the way it did. But started by, and that's what I was saying earlier, how many times each show with its own set of restrictions and opportunities, it kind of guides you a little bit. Because maybe you think of something, but then you can't do it for one reason or another. And that brings up an opportunity. I'm a firm believer that sometimes challenges make you come up with better things in some ways. And this is something that ended up, that's kind of how it happened. It wasn't that we had to build a two-story house for that episode. The fact that we had a two-story house, Mike thought, well, what's the best use we can give to this that we have? And that's kind of one way of this, the story went with this. And even, for example, since we had now these ceilings that were on the first floor, ended up being a little lower than originally planned, because we had to put we always had big scale beams and decorative elements on the ceilings, but here we had to now make them deeper to be able to hide lights within these designs. So the sensation in a way was the ceilings were coming a little lower. So that's why I plan also, when you come into the house in the foyer, there's this big opening in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And that's something that was planned just to give scale to the house. Because if you are opening the doors and you see the stairs, it's a big space. But if you have the ceiling right here, it's always also going to kind of constrain, or just the feeling of that grandiosity was going to be curtailed. So in this way, by opening that, which took me a while to find the right kind of hexagon or whatever it ended up being, but it's something you open, you can see that big exposure to that. You don't see a ceiling, you just don't see an ending to that. And you see the stairs and better view of the stained glass, everything about it. So also, that was the reason why we had that design there, but then it worked perfectly well for that episode, where at some point the camera jumps on this little lift that allows for, they follow the characters and then they come down the stairs with the camera on that lift. And that was just by chance in a way that we had that and we were able to use it. That was part of the design before we thought about it, but it worked perfectly well.
You mentioned the scale of the house in the foyer, noticeably with that huge staircase and those openings in the ceilings. It reminds me of the library, because it also it takes both floors, right? It's not just on the first floor, it goes up. And you don't even see its ceiling.
We added a third floor for the library.
Okay.
So it goes beyond the two floors. Yeah, that was pretty insane. We are like really all the way up to the rafters of the stage. And that staircase was something also very kind of scary to go up that thing.
So does that mean that the red room is on the third floor?
Correct.
Okay, now I'm picturing the house. I've been going over the layout of the house in my head, not understanding where the red room was. As I rewatched some of the scenes of the show, what threw me off is, okay, so you have the foyer, and you go up the staircase. You have two corridors that go on each side, and that's, I think, the one to the right. But at some point, you end up on the one that's very modern with the big windows. That's the one where the windows explode in one of the episodes, in Two Storms, actually. And then the character of the father walks down that corridor and then takes a corner, and it ends, and there's nothing. And I was like, what is the purpose of this corridor? It goes nowhere.
Well, it's part of kind of the whole schizophrenia elements that we were talking about. Yeah. It's all this, like, you don't know where you are, right? It's part of, and particularly that was by design, that we want the audience to be a little bit uncomfortable in not knowing what's going on or where you're going or where you come from. So all of that there was a thought behind. But then also we had one big stage with the two stories of the house. Mm-hmm. But then more things kept on coming, more sets kept on coming. Yeah. Because most times, we don't have, the showrunner, the writer doesn't have all of the episodes written when we start shooting, or when we start at least working. So we had to build another third floor where you go around and actually go into the red room. That was later done on another stage. So we had to reproduce the top part of the spiral staircase. Yeah. And the whole episode, and then the floor there where the spiral, the section of the spiral staircase was all painted green. So then it could be matched to the actual library that we had on the other side. But that red room wasn't part of came later. So all of that, there were all these pieces that you were supposed to turn around here and then you were there. But that's why they are very distinctive looks, and yet some other things that are the same. So you could just feel that, yeah, you were there, you turn around and you're here, even though we're in different stages, for example. And in other places, they're completely different. So you feel how big this place is. And also how is this, where are we? It's all part of the idea.
Going back on what I was saying about scale, I read about how the fireplace in the living room was made so that this huge mantelpiece was to give the room a sense of scale. And I wondered, because like you said, like when the audience watches the show, it all looks so grand and you believe everything. You believe those huge front doors. You believe that huge foyer. You believe that huge library. And so what are some of the tricks of production design that are there to kind of trick the eye of the audience to make it look bigger than it actually is?
That was again another challenge, because as we were talking about the robber barons, those houses were gigantic. So we had to give the impression that this was one of those, but of course we were never going to have that kind of scale. So the foyer, for example, is the first thing we see, the first thing the audience, the first place we are in. So that is very large, because that was important that and there's so much going on there, and that's why it was important not to be kind of hampered down by the ceiling, and that's why I opened it like that. So that was something that is real, is big. The stairs are majestic and also big, and you can see through. So that's already the sense of depth. The fact also that you can see from flanking the stairs, there are hallways you see through. So something that I really worked on was to have, no matter where in the house you were, to be able to see through different rooms and to see through different. So then that's contrasting styles and then lighting, and so that gives a lot of depth. So that's something that for times is real, but then we also use. So by the time you go into the living room, where the big fireplace, that, for example, the doors and the frames are really large. So that maybe the living room is big, but not as big. But the fact that when you have one of your actors standing right next to this 10-foot door, the actor looks like this. So you see that, and you may lose the fact that the actual living room is not that big. You don't see it. I think that by now, I think we can say that we succeeded in that you don't realize that it's not that big, but you're standing by these elements that are so large that this is clearly a big house. And the fireplace, the mantelpiece, is like about 6 feet, I think, and as wider. So it just has that, when you have someone standing there, when you see that from the distance, it helps that narrative that this is a large place. And then from that, the openings of the living room allow you to always, wherever you are, even if you don't move necessarily the camera that much, you are seeing through all these other hallways and all through the music room and into the library. You have a hallway, music room, library, and then the the garden, the winter garden over there. And there's always just all these elements going on. Another thing is the proportions of the wainscot and the moldings. Everything was very deep, so that helps create a lot of shadows. And just also that sense of, if you have someone walking by, you have this big wainscot. They're just, those elements really help with that.
I'm gonna carry you. You keep your eyes closed no matter what you hear. You don't open them. You promise? Do you promise?
I promise.
Keep your eyes closed no matter what. You keep them closed.
But there's also the sense that you're always being observed when you're in the house, in the Hill house. And for example, going back to the mantelpiece, there's all these faces. There's a little rat eating the ear of one of the spaces. So very, very gothic, right? Yeah. Actually, the living room is one of the, if everything is very charged, The living room is the place that I went wild. I was like, okay, we're going to throw everything at this living room. And so I was building and time and money. And I was always like, I think we should do this one more thing. And I would come with some idea or something. I'm like, oh, I love it. Okay, let's do it. And then the mantelpiece, the fireplace was done. But I was presenting like one by one the ideas, because it's always all these things. Let's see how this works. Let's see where we are with everything else. If I don't want to show also things that maybe then I'm not going to have time to do them right. Time or the money. So, but as I was going, I think we can pull it off. I go, Mike, one more thing. What do you think about? So I had all this rendering of what it looks now with all the faces on the top of the mantelpiece that weren't there till then. And he looks at us like, I love it, but I have one condition. It's like, what's it? Your face has to be in there. I was like, oh, come on. I was like, yes. I think, you know what? Sure, let's do it. So I ended up having a cast made of my face, and he told me where he wanted it. So it's a place that you can see it, but obviously it's not like the main feature.
Yeah.
Luckily, which, by the way, I still have that face in my garage somewhere here. But anyway, that was his one. He had to have that one condition.
Yeah.
So yeah, there it is on the side, kind of like on the side going out one corridor. There's that face there. But it was really funny. And a few years earlier, I probably would have fought off and not have it. At that point, I was like, sure, why not? You know, how many times I'm going to be able to do that?
Might as well.
Anyway, so that was a funny anecdote. But going back to the idea is that you always have this feeling of, anxiety where you're in there. So the wallpaper is all this wallpaper that looks kind of like Green Man, that if you don't pay attention, it's just these, leaves. But if you look at it in a certain way, you can easily quickly see, oh, wait a minute, those are eyes there, and they may be or not. But that is everywhere. All the hardware. The hardware has also kind of, not sometimes faces, but more likely just things that could be. That's kind of something that was always there. So the statues are a big part of that you're being observed, that there's someone behind you, that you're like, feeling that kind of sense.
As you mentioned, shoving many different styles into the house because of the influence that you were going for. What are some of those styles? So there's Gothic, but what else is in there?
The main thing that I kind of tried to do was to do something that I call enchanting architecture. Enchanting in terms of like, it's not only, as you were saying, attractive and good looking, but also enchanting, almost like hypnotizing, right? Or something. So for that, we did summon, as the Robber Barons did, a lot of mainly Gothic, Tudor, but there's also some Romanesque, Moorish also. So that's kind of the main melange that we have there.
And so, as you said, you did the intricate work of creating the interior of the house. And for Two Storms, episode 6, you had to connect that house to another important set on the show, which is the funeral home. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That was a challenge. The funeral home, which was their business and the residency at the same time, and the parlor, that was all on stage, and then some parts of the house and the exterior was a location. But the main parlor, that was, by then we did know that this special episode was coming. So it was a challenge to design, but mainly kind of the only way to do it, because this was on another stage, like a contiguous next door stage with one wall dividing, and we had doors that are big but just regular doors, not like big jumbo doors. So we had to use the fire lane. Every stage has something called a fire lane. It's about 4 or 5 feet from the wall, that nothing can be there. That has to be always unobstructed. So in case of any kind of emergency, we, the crew that is there, we know that we can touch the wall and walk away without tripping on any tripods or set pieces or anything like that. And I've done this before on other shows, so I thought it was worth checking. So we designed something, and then we had to get permission from the fire department, the studio heads, to do this, that basically we park our new set, we align it right with these actual stage doors that led to the next stage, and had to do all these different things. So basically, even though we had all this stuff, it was still unobstructed, and it was still a real escape route if we needed it to use. So that in itself was like parking, I don't know, two big ships, one next to each other to make that work. A lot of precision building went into that.
And what was your approach to the design of the funeral home in terms of the decor, the color palette, all of that? Every time I see it, it kind of has that hospital vibe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're based in research. This is something that we wanted to walk away from the house, so it's a lot more stark. It was important that no one was ever confused of where we were. Mm-hmm. That this, whatever you were within the funeral parlor or the residence, this residence, you were not at Hill House. Yeah. So for that, elements had to be a lot simpler, but still elegant and still a proper funeral home. Then in terms of color, that main room, it became a bit of kind of sickly color palette in a way. Just kind of something, again, that feeling of something that looks good, but may make you a little bit sick to your stomach almost. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's what I remember right now.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, it does have that, and it's a funeral home. It's not a space where you really want to stay.
No, exactly. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the Red Room, as we've mentioned before. And it turns out to be a space that adjusts itself to the different characters. It aligns with their personalities and interests. And we find out by the end of the show that it's Luke's treehouse, it's Theo's dance studio, it's Olivia's reading room, all at once. But when you rewatch the show after finding that out, you can see little things here and there that are kind of hinting that this is all the Red Room. The one thing I noticed primarily was the door handle with the lion head on it. What are some of the other things that kind of like hint at it without being too on the nose, because you don't want to spoil the surprise, so you have to walk that fine line, I imagine, in the design?
There's really, that I can think about now, one element that is the one kind of constant, because some of them are completely, it was never set in stone what was is this part of this magical realm that the house is. But when we actually eventually see the Red Room for what it is, we see all this mold growing everywhere. Yeah. So at some point it was mentioned that it was almost like this was some kind of fungus, some kind of psychedelic substance, that when you were there, you were completely gone in your own surreal world. But between the power of the house and that was kind of the soul of the house, that room. And people would go there but don't even remember how they got there, that they were there. So some of these rooms were completely different. But the one element, because also there's only one window in this room, because it was important for Mike that there wasn't any suggestion or any question that somebody could go crazy and jump out of the window. So that's why the one window we have is small, and that window is in the tree house, and that's one element. And then within the window, Mike had this idea that he wanted the glass of that window to have a crack. So we had a very specific crack. And for example, at the tree house, we model a twig in the same style as the crack on the glass. So that was one of the most. And then there's a trapdoor. I think the trapdoor was red. We have little things like that once it becomes like, oh, now I see it. Subtle, but there were cues there that you were never supposed to see that coming. That it was never. But once you see it, and for the people, I know a lot of people love and rewatch this many times, they find those elements there.
And it's so interesting because the window, yes, the shape, the narrow window you notice, and once you rewatch it and you see, you're like, yeah, that's the exact same window. But the crack, to the naked eye watching the show, I'm like, where is the crack? I don't see it. So I always find it
it's there. That's something that I certainly love. And one of the things I love working with Mike, that is one of those people that I like to work. I always feel that I work for the unconscious, the subliminal. I love to put there on all my sets that are not necessarily supposed to be seen, but to be felt. That's something that I think it makes of, a successful design, when there's things that you don't know why you liked it or why it didn't work. Obviously, I work for why people like the show, people felt in a certain way. I always work for the subliminal, things that maybe you see it, maybe no, but it is there.
Before I let you go, I have to talk about the last stage of Hill House as we see it in the end of the show, when it really turns into this abandoned, creepy haunted mansion vibe, and it feels like it's showing its true nature. Can you tell me about the process of turning the house into that look?
Yes, it's its true ugliness, but it's also time went by.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's not like the house was like that and they didn't notice or anything like that. But yeah, that it was a challenge, of course, to have to do that. So we waited because sometimes script wise, certain conditions happen, let's say in episode, to say something, episode 7, and then we are in episode 10 and the house is perfectly nice. So what we try and what we work to avoid with the schedule was having to destroy it all or get it into this neglected, abandoned condition and then turn it back into the beautiful house, because that's an expensive endeavor for sure. And time consuming as well. So the things were done that when there was a hiatus, the art department stayed behind and we worked on, and by the time everybody came back to work, we had the place, and that was the last that we shot on the house. So in terms of kind of logistics, that's something that we have to work for a long time already, work with the first ADs that are in charge of the AD department, in charge of schedules and all of that, and production, to be able to work it out in a way that we get some time, that maybe you don't have anybody just waiting around, because that it takes a long time to do something of that scale. And here we did the interior and the exterior too.
Yeah, because the exterior has all those boarded windows and vines everywhere.
Exactly. So yeah, it was a big job.
And is there an approach to it where you're like, you're like, okay, I have to show this house in this decrepit stage, and it's full of dust and nature has come kind of taken over, but were there like, I want to say, like traps that you wanted to avoid, like things that you were like, oh, I don't want it to be just cobwebs everywhere and be kind of like a caricature of the haunted house?
Yeah, the whole thing, both faces, I always wanted to avoid becoming a pantomime, right? A caricature.
Yeah.
We always wanted to look something serious, something real. And that, in everything I do, is the goal, the aspiration, to make it look really rotten, but not like a, fair Halloween house. It has to look like time passed. This is really, and that takes a lot of skills. We had our scenic department work very hard, construction, of course, takes a lot of people and a lot of work, and specific stuff that I was working for a long time and working with an illustrator also, one of my team members I always work with, and just ideas, and that's again research. Okay, this has to look like this and this, but the goal was to make it look rotten and abandoned, but in a realistic way.
It's the end of this episode of Once Upon a TV Time. Thank you so much for listening. Patricio Farrell, thank you very much for walking through the corridors of Hill House with me once again.
Marine Perot, a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for inviting me for this.
If you're interested in seeing Patricio's most recent work on television, go check out Dark Matter on Apple TV. Folks, I will be back soon with a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time and a new guest. Stay tuned. Follow this podcast on social media for all the details. Leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And until then, go watch some television.